everybody. I'm David Holmes. I'm currently CTO at Imperva for application security, but for a long time I was the analyst for Zero Trust at Forrester, including things like Zero Trust Access, Microsegmentation.
David, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Skip Sorrels. I'm the field CTO and CISO now for Claroty. I was a former customer for the past 6 years, and I was at a very large healthcare organization in the United States where I developed programs for medical device OT and IoT. So I'm really excited to meet you today. I've heard really good things about your analyst work, especially in the realm of microsegmentation, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah. When I look back on my time at Forrester, in my early conversations with actual practitioners like you were at the time, so many projects either stalled or failed. And some of the vendors who were big in the space at the time, a lot of times they would just make the sale, partner would get their cut, and then they all go on their merry way, leaving the customer to basically try to implement one of the most complicated, sophisticated security solutions that's ever been tried. And it's no wonder that they failed so often. And so that was basically the state of the community when I was starting to do the research. But as we moved forward in time and I started doing evaluative research, the world drastically changed up until about last year when I stopped covering it.
I would completely agree with that. So for 6 years, I lobbied, I screamed and yelled to get to a NAC. And one of the biggest challenges you just highlighted was this resistance to change, the resource overhead, and this thinking from a legacy NAC perspective that building profiles and creating policies was a 2 to 3 year process, which I had experienced when I did work in the DoD.
Yeah.
And so it was a slog and a struggle, and yet I knew that the technology was emerging, evolving, and being very innovative, and I saw opportunities specifically with Elisity. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. Yeah. It's unfortunate, however, at the time they were new, and the focus was on the prominent big boy in the environment, and we weren't one of them. And so I had to look at different alternatives through other technical controls.
Just waiting for that to go by. So San Francisco. So I remember those days too, and there were, say, network incumbents, right? And everybody, including the network vendors, wanted the network to do the work of microsegmentation, right? It's just natural.
Absolutely.
It's just natural. Think of it as like stoplights should be on the street, right?
Right.
But that was not everyone's experience, right? Because the networking community is in the business of connecting things and allowing traffic, not necessarily shutting it down.
Right.
And so I feel like the whole community spent, 10 years, 15 years trying to get the network to do the work. To the point where the only solutions that worked, say, 7, 8 years ago, were ones that were not network-based, that were based on software. But that has its own set of issues in that installing software everywhere is a drag. No one wants to do that. You have to get buy-in from stakeholders. What if you can't install software, like in a healthcare environment?
Absolutely.
Right?
And who's going to manage it after the fact?
Right.
How many people am I going to need? Oh my gosh, I can't hire. We're under hiring freeze. All of those people process technology challenges.
And I'm not saying that's not the way to do it. I'm just saying that comes with its own challenges.
Agree.
That people weren't necessarily excited about because they're trying to solve a network problem with host software. One of the reasons I said this is the golden age of microsegmentation is there are solutions out there like Elisity that actually get the network to do the work, right? And I won't go into the secret sauce of how they do it, but I did have them explain to me, now, how do you make this work? Where those network incumbents failed, and I was very impressed. So it's very cool what they can do now, especially as it relates to, say, an integration with Claroty. I assume you see that integration all the time.
We're seeing it more and more, and quite frankly, it's probably the conversation I lead the most with our customers and our prospects. It's the platform can be and is all-encompassing. However, you must leverage the integrations. We have over 100. We have several with network. And those integrations, the power of correlation of data and the bidirectional communication absolutely accelerate the movement of evolution and innovation within an environment, specifically with network. And so that's why I'm really keen on the Elisity product, because the time to value is so great compared to traditional.
That's a great point that you bring up, time to value. So prior to, say, integrations like the one you're doing with Elisity, what people would have to do for microsegmentation is, say, install some sensors somewhere, watch the flow of traffic and figure out how tens of thousands of things are talking to each other, then start to put in place policies that are going to enforce it, right? And they would build up to this time, which might take years, where they're going to be like, all right, we're going to enforce it. And as soon as you hit that button, a whole bunch of stuff's going to break.
Right.
And you're going to look terrible. Right?
That's right.
If you did your job perfectly, no one would notice.
Absolutely.
Right?
And they shouldn't. That's the beauty of technology.
But the time to value in that case was zero, less than zero, all the way up until you hit the button.
Right.
The approaches people can do today are what I think it was like horizontal microsegmentation, where you say, hey, based on the device types, let me apply a broad-based policy that might say every video camera can talk directly to the internet or directly to this set of servers, but not anything else. I don't want them attacking the servers in the closet, right?
Right.
But it's only because the policy knows these are video cameras, and they get that information from something like a Clarity. Is that what you had been seeing or talking to people about as well?
Absolutely. So one of the number one things you can do from a technical controls perspective, especially in healthcare, knowing that you're battling the legacy medical devices. They have a lifespan of 10 to 15, 20 years sometimes. And so they're high dollar things. They're not going to move them in and out like a workstation refresh. And you meet this point in time where the manufacturer, you can still get parts and do break fix, but there's no patches. And so risk begins to go up while the useful lifespan continues. And the only way you can really buy yourself time is to create an ecosystem based on microsegmentation to protect them to the best of your ability while you figure out the financial aspect of the lifecycle refresh of those devices. So it becomes very, very critical and important in healthcare.
So one question I wanted to ask you, Skip, is microsegmentation as a project was hard enough in a static environment, but nothing is really static. Do you see in environments today that it's easier now if devices are added to the network, that Clarity can do something to, say, inform an Elisity that the policy should change or shouldn't change?
Absolutely. So our platform is very keen to recognize quite quickly the introduction of a new asset or the joining of a new asset to the network, quite frankly, whether it's guest or corporate. And we have custom alerts as well as out-of-the-box alerts for those types of events. And we created workflows depending on the alert type, whether it was a SIM alert that needed to be evaluated by the SOC, or it was a network alert to say, hey, this thing's on the network. And so what I envisioned strategically was taking that alert information, that fidelity, and communicating directly to an Elisity, which then we would have a workflow that said, is this a known good entity or not? If so, what type? Information coming from Clarity. That particular asset in this location on that VLAN needs to go into this ecosystem called this microsegment, or we don't know, so guess what? It gets quarantined, and it's given a guest IP, if you will, potentially, or not, completely block one or the other. But the point is, that's where the critical thinkers come in. An alert would go through that workflow to the team to evaluate, is this a known good entity and where should it be? And then they could click a button and enable it to whatever segmentation strategy or policy they wanted.
You brought up a key word there, quarantine.
Yes.
That's not something that existed easily in the original microsegmentation solutions.
I agree.
Right?
I agree. It was kind of an all or nothing.
It was all or nothing. And one of the reasons I called this the golden age of microsegmentation is you have these abilities now. If something appears on the network, you don't know if it's good or bad. What were you going to do with it before? There was only deny, right? You couldn't let it on. But now you could at least quarantine it. Maybe it can do its thing. Maybe can somebody connect to it and figure out what it is and do its thing. So
exactly.
that exists now where it didn't exist before.
Well, and you talked about, hey, when you push that button, you're either going to have a heyday or you're going to have a you-know-what day. It's something going to break and blow up. Right. And in that environment, again, that thinking and experience from the legacy aspect of networking and technology, that was one of the big pushbacks. I don't have the people to evaluate all of the things that are going to get stopped. And we're going to have mad people at us because there are going to be clinical applications and clinical devices that come in our network. It might be a physician or somebody trying out something new they want to, try before you buy kind of thing. Or it could be somebody malicious, but until you have that moment, you can't evaluate it. But there is no in between. And so they're like, we can't handle that workload because we had 1 million IPs in action between our corporate and guest networks on any given day. It was a big mess.
Big mess. Have you been down to the floor? Have you seen a lot of Zero Trust down there?
I have not been to the floor, I will say.
Yeah.
I have had so many interactions with folks like yourself, people that have come and visited us, and everybody's asking about Zero Trust. I'll let you give your opinion and I'll go first.
Yeah. So did you want to go first?
I will go first, if you don't mind. So, when Zero Trust hit the buzzword galley, so to speak, I went, that's terrible. The concept is genuine. I absolutely appreciate it. I would love to get to a true Zero Trust. But at that point in time, 3 years ago, I'm thinking it's kind of when it started, when I came aware of it, I was like, I'm gonna grapple with the concept, I'm gonna embrace it, I'm gonna move as much as I can towards that philosophy. But I hesitate to say it's true Zero Trust because there's a lot of elements that have to work together effectively to get to a Zero Trust. Fast forward to now, I'm still hesitant, but I'm more open and excited about the evolution of technology, and it's going to advance our ability to get very, very close, if not some point soon, a Zero Trust environment.
Right. I used to describe, if people were trying to understand Zero Trust, it is basically replacing implicit trust in an environment with explicit policy.
Agree.
So if you have no policy, everything can connect to everything, which is like the opposite of Zero Trust.
Star.star.
Zero Trust is things can only connect to things that they're allowed to. Right?
Yes.
So that's the explicit policy.
Yes.
Now it's very easy to say that, but actually defining that policy is the difficult work, right?
Agree.
I have never been an absolutist or an idealist or a zealot about Zero Trust, but many people are. They would say, it's this nirvana. It's the opposite of what we have now. It can never exist. It can never truly exist, so why try, right? Which is a very defeatist way of looking at it.
Sure.
I have always thought, if you can make progress to get to more explicit policy and less implicit trust, you have made progress in Zero Trust. But I would always tell people the hard part, but the real part is the network. If you're not doing it in the network, all right, you're cosplaying Zero Trust at this point, right? It's not quite that bad, but
right.
But if you are doing it in the network with Elisity or somebody else and you're in blocking mode, I would absolutely say you have made huge strides to Zero Trust. And there's a lot of that out there. People trying to figure out, like, what level is my maturity? Where am I at? What should I do next? And I'd always say, all right, the network is the hard part, but we have better tools now, like Elisity in a partnership with Claroty.
Fantastic. So we're not far off at all. I think we would say we're aligned. I think.
Well, I think so now.
Yeah, absolutely. Having this conversation. So, going to throw a curveball at you.
Try stump the analyst.
What's the newest buzz?
So I've been down on the floor, and there's a lot of AI.
Yes,
a lot of AI.
exactly. So how do you think that's going? How do you foresee that factoring into what we've just talked about? I'm curious.
So let me step back just a little bit and say, have these conversations about, say, let's talk about protecting AI. That's just in the wheelhouse with the customer conversations that I have. Right? In my current role as CTO for Imperva, the question, I will always ask the question, do you think your organization, or are you guys planning on releasing like a generative AI application? Every single one is either yes or yeah, we're working on it, right? And I would ask them, like, what do you anticipate is the security for that? And they all say the same thing, we don't know, which is fair.
I agree.
Which is fair. So we at Imperva have been trying to keep up on how are these things supposed to be secured, but it changes so fast. You remember a month ago, no one ever heard of MCP, like the Model Context Protocol.
Right.
And then that was super hot for like 10 days.
Uh-huh.
And then Google comes out and says, no, it's all agent to agent. I'm like, well, good thing we didn't bet the farm on that MCP thing. So
Right.
in some sense, I think enterprises, healthcare organizations out there, hopefully can rely on us vendors to get this figured out. In some cases, I think a lot of the threat reduction will happen for implementing things like Zero Trust, implementing things like API security, because a lot of these AI are going to be using APIs in the back end. But what's really going to stymie everyone is basically the natural language interface that Gen AI introduces. That's like the power of the thing, right? Like,
Right.
But that's also the biggest threat surface. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on it?
Very, very similar. Healthcare specifically, when ChatGPT got announced for the first time, of course, we had to go into block mode because we had already learned through our threat intelligence that there were clinicians and other organizations that unknowingly introduced PHI into a open AI platform.
Like uploading x-rays and stuff?
How about let's talk about dictation of patient condition and notes. So very specific, very detailed PHI. And so we had to write a policy, and we had to use technical controls to enforce not allowing that traffic out of our network. And then immediately we went to, I don't know, but we'll have to figure it out because it's kind of a necessary, I don't want to say evil, but it's a necessary element that you have to evaluate and begin to adopt to. And so the question then becomes, how do you do that safely with HIPAA and NIST framework and all of these things that play into security for the betterment of the outcome of the patient? Because that's really what we were after.
And so speaking as a former analyst, I'm not a researcher anymore. I tend to think in those terms, but it'll be interesting to see if anybody tries to make an intersection between Zero Trust and AI.
And that's kind of where I was going with my question.
I don't see it yet because exactly what is the explicit policy?
Right.
It's almost like Gen AI contains within itself multiple methods of evasion. Like if you've seen guardrails around an AI where it's not allowed to talk about something, right?
Sure.
And then somebody says, okay, give me the answer, but replace all of the A's with the letter 4 and all of the E's with the number 3.
Right.
So it spits back all the information, and then the guardrails miss it, right? I'm like, that's because they're looking basically for signature-based, but you're talking to something that's like, in some ways, almost as smart as a human.
Agree.
But it has none of the common sense of a human, right? So,
Right. It only knows what it knows by virtue of what it's learned.
Right.
And I would also say the introduction of bias because of how it learned. And so I'm really watching that closely. I get asked about Zero Trust and AI a lot. And I'm like you, researcher at heart, science guy, nerd, whatever you want to call it. But it's like, how do you break that apart and how do you control it and how do you make the most use of it?
I think they're somewhat antithetical at the moment, to be honest. I think the value that people have in a generative AI is how much it knows. But Zero Trust is about, hey, you should only tell what you know to people who are allowed to hear it.
Right.
And that those two things are not there right now. So
Absolutely.
The best we're going to see is maybe Zero Trust access to the right Gen AIs or the right RAG data or something, right? But that's very much an infrastructure process kind of conversation. Not super exciting or germane to, hey, Gen AI is a really cool thing.
Right. Awesome.
I've really enjoyed talking to you, Skip.
Absolutely. Thank you very
fun.
much.
That was
Enjoyed
fun.
it. Let's keep talking.